At Bedford Jail on April the 4th, 1962, James Hanratty was hanged for the A6 murder.
I had no proof that he was innocent at the trial, but I felt he should never have been convicted on evidence of identification, which you could pull to pieces, and which I, who am only a doctor and not a lawyer, found fallacious in the extreme.
Dr. David Lewis, a Bedford specialist, attended the trial. He has been a member of the A6 Murder Committee ever since, a committee which campaigns for a public inquiry into Hanratty's guilt.
I stood over on the other side of the road. I rode here on a bike, and there were a few people, a couple standing, one with judicial murder, with a notice of judicial murder, and I stood here waiting for the hour because I felt I had a loyalty, because I believed in his innocence, and I believed not for emotion, but on trial evidence.
I'll say this now. The cartridges was laid in the Vienna Hotel to be found. Yeah. The gun was put on the bus to be found. Yeah. And that was the setup. Hanratty was framed. Yeah. Definitely framed.
The committee has been led by James Hanratty's father, an engineering worker in North London, and his wife Mary, who works in a soft drinks factory. Before their son's execution, Mr. and Mrs. Hanratty collected more than 20,000 signatures calling for a reprieve. Ever since, they have campaigned with meetings, leaflets and television appearances to reopen the case.
12 months later, Elphone come to my house. He put his checkbook on my table. He says, Mr. Hanratty, let me compensate you for what has happened to you and your family. I then told him all the money in the world would not compensate me for what has happened to me and my family. At that time, I said, I want you to get up and get out of here, or otherwise there would have been a real murder done. Even if he's a nutcase, why isn't he brought in? Why is he allowed to go and do just as he pleases?
I've been inside. I'm only out 2 weeks inside, and straight up, you want to read his letter to the Home Office. He put his heart and his feelings into a letter. And that letter, if you read that from start to finish, that'll make you cry. And there's no man alive could put his feelings into a thing like that if he was not innocent.
Come on, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, come on. Thank you. Thank you, come on.
So I'd like you all to come and hear for yourselves in the regards of James Hanratty. Judge for yourselves, and that's all I ask you to do. There's 11 witnesses up in North Wales swears in all doubt that Hanratty was there on the night of the 22nd. The Home Office knows they got the evidence, but they just don't want an inquiry. Why? There was doubt at Bedford when they executed him. They know they've got the evidence. Lord Russell, Lord Brockway, Miss Joan Lester, and 180 MPs say in Parliament James Hanratty was innocent. So come on January the 1st, fill up the town hall, and you hear all about it.
One such meeting was held in Watford Town Hall on New Year's Day 1969. More than 300 people came to the town hall to hear speeches from the committee.
Why have we come along? Well, actually I did it because I'm very interested in the Hanratty case. Because I've done some work at school on Hanratty. I did some project, thesis on Hanratty. Very interested in the discussion of the case. Very interested.
Why?
Well, having read a bit about it and discussed it myself, but very interesting. I like to hear other people's views on this point.
There must be something about this inquiry, so I just come to find out. General attitude, really.
You know, it's an interesting case, and especially after the recent abolition of hanging. And I've seen a documentary on television, you know, saying that all about the case, and I'm interested to hear further.
Well, I'm against capital punishment. I know it's been abolished, but I'm still interested in this case. I'd like to see his name cleared.
Basically because I feel that it was an injustice committed, you know. I don't think the trial was properly conducted at all. I think basically it's an innocent man who was hanged.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps I can just tell you that we do have with us several members of the Hanratty family. On my right, Mrs. Hanratty, the mother of the executed boy, and on the extreme right, his brother. On the left is Mr. Jean Justice. He is the one, really, who has kept this thing going through 8 long, weary years. And on the extreme left, Mr. Paul Foot, an editor of Private Eye and a well-known journalist. Well, perhaps it is only fair for me just firstly to briefly outline what the case is all about. In August of 1961, in fact on the evening of the 22nd of August 1961, somebody tapped on the car in which a couple, Valerie Story and Michael Gregson, were sitting. He tapped on the window and pointed a gun in and made them move over, and he got into the back of the car. About 2 hours later, the car drove off and they headed towards London. They stopped on a number of occasions, once for petrol, and all the time the gunman sat in the back of the car. Finally, they got to a lay-by on the A6 at a place called Dead Man's Hill. And here, the gunman suddenly shot Michael Gregson twice in the head. And he then told Valerie's Story to get the body out of the car, and having raped her, he fired a number of shots at her and left her for dead. The car then drove off and was found abandoned the following morning in Avondale Crescent at Ilford. Now, there was very little evidence for the police to go on. Valerie's Story, in fact, survived that terrible ordeal. But she was in a very critical state, and a description was given of the murderer, and a large-scale police hunt took place. Now, the first man to be brought in was a man called Peter Louis Alphon. He was eventually put on an identity parade, and Valerie's Story failed to pick him out. She picked out somebody else on the parade, whom she later admitted looked a bit like Alphon, but she failed to identify Alphon as her assailant. And some weeks later, when she was in Bedford, then a second identity parade was held, and on that parade she picked out James Hanratty. Then, after one of the longest trials in English legal history, 21 days, and a judge's summing up lasting 10 hours, after the jury had been out for 6.5 hours, they came back and asked for further guidance. And in fact, they were out for a very long period, and finally a verdict of guilty was brought in. Now, many people at the time were very disturbed, and a large number of members of Parliament urged the Home Secretary to recommend clemency. This was Mr. R.A. Butler. But he refused to do so, and in February of 1962, James Hanratty was hung.
Perhaps you could tell us a little about Jimmy, what sort of a person he was, what sort of a life he led.
Well, up until he was 15 years of age, he led a nice, normal life like any of the other sons. And from 15, 16, 17, he was in touch with France. He got in touch with France up in London. From there, he got into some very bad habits of housebreaking, and, you know, he was on the fiddle all the time with France. But in the course of different periods, he'd come home and then go away again. But any time he'd done anything wrong, he never done it at home. He always went to London to do it.
He went to prison a few times, didn't he? How many times did he go to prison?
He went to prison, I believe it was 3 times, for